I welcome you to the fifth lecture of week 1 in the course Environmental Politics, Theories, Concepts and Debates. In this week, we are discussing rise and growth of environmentalism. Till now, we have developed an understanding that how environmentalism emerged, how it has grown over a period of time, what do we mean by green ideology, what are its various branches, and also major features of green ideology. We also discussed some major concepts like holism, sustainability, and environmental ethics. Today we'll talk about two more concepts which are very major concepts in environmental discourse. One is environmental justice and another is environmental literacy. If you see around the world, you will find there are large number of environmental movements which are launched for the cause of environmental justice. Similarly, when we talk about environmental literacy, gradually it has been understood that this issue of environmental crisis cannot be handled unless and until there is a change in the mindset. Now, how this mindset can be changed? And here comes the role of education and environmental literacy. And that is the reason that in recent years, environmental literacy has become a core component of school curricula as well as higher education. Today, we'll try to understand various aspects of these two concepts. So, this is the outline of the lecture. Today, we are going to cover these aspects in this lecture. So, to begin with the concept of environmental justice. You see, when we talk about justice, for a long time it has been seen as a principle of fair treatment towards human beings. Now, green thinkers emphasize the need for rethinking the notion of justice by integrating ecological concern. So, when we look at green notion of justice, we can say broadly it has three dimensions. First, it talks about justice towards nature. Second, justice towards future generation. That can be called intergenerational justice. And third, addressing the issue of differentials in exposures to environmental disasters and to prevent environmental racism. So, to begin with, justice towards nature. So, the green notion of justice extends the principle and sphere of justice to the biotic community. Now, as I said, that for a long time we have seen justice as a fair principle or a principle of fair distribution of resources, goods, services, opportunity among human community. Now, green thinkers argue that there is a need for change in the notion of the community. They have expanded it by talking about biotic community. Now, when we talk about biotic community, it includes all the organisms and entities in the biosphere. So, all the organisms and entities in the biosphere are worthy of fair treatment. Here, a concept given by Peter Wenge of concentric circle of responsibility is very, very important. He gave this concept in his book Environmental Justice, where it is emphasized that man is responsible for the consequences of his action and must take responsibility for its impact on his surrounding. So, whatever action we perform, we are responsible for that, and we are responsible for its impact on not only other human beings, but how it is going to have an impact on the whole surrounding. And this surrounding includes humans, the other animate beings, as well as inanimate world. So this is what justice towards nature. Now the second aspect, that is intergenerational justice. As I said in the beginning, that justice includes finding out fair principles of distribution of resources, opportunities. So when we say fair principle of distribution of resources and opportunity, the question is that distribution among whom? So intergenerational justice argues that it includes the claims of future generations. Humans have a moral obligation towards their contemporaries as well as the coming generation. And it must be reflected in their consumption pattern and distribution of resources. So we need to be fair to our future generation in terms of consumption of natural resources. So this is the second aspect, that is intergenerational justice. Now we'll talk about the third and very, very important aspect, that is addressing the issue of differential exposure to environmental disaster. You see, when we talk about natural calamity or any disaster, we know that it impacts everyone. No one can say that he or she is immune from the impact of natural calamity or disaster. It impacts every class, every section of the population. But at the same time, there is another very important fact, that it does not impact everyone equally. That does not mean that natural calamities or disaster do some kind of discrimination, that whom to impact or whom not to impact. It happens. Why? Because we are living in a society which is not equal. There are socio cultural, economic, political hierarchies. And therefore, those who are at the fringes, those who are at the margin, like women, children, poor, tribal people, indigenous community, they are more vulnerable to the devastating impact of ecological crisis. And analysis of this unequal impact led to the development of the concept of environmental justice. If we talk about the beginning of this concept or history of this concept, we can say that this debate on environmental justice started from the United States in 1970s, and gradually it is spread in the other parts of the globe. So we need to see what happened during 1970s in the United States. In the large number of studies conducted in US to assess the impact of climate change, pollution, and the other environmental risks on human population, it was found that it has a disproportionate effect on community of colors and low income communities. It was seen that whenever there is an issue of climate change, pollution, or other environmental risk, its impact on the communities of color and low income communities are more severe. And these findings laid the foundation for the environmental justice movement in America during early 1980s. Here, I would like to mention one very important incident, which become a kind of triggering issue. A decision was taken by the state of North Carolina to place a toxic waste landfill in a predominantly African American community in Warren County. Now the local resident started protesting that how can government decide to place a toxic waste landfill without thinking that how it is going to have an impact on the health of local residents and also the future generation. Despite the protest, this landfill was placed there, and but what happened? It led to a very, very strong movement. In coming weeks, we will discuss about that movement. Here we are concerned with the concept. So this is the context in which the debate on environmental justice started. Now, how to define environmental justice? There can be two ways. One, to define it negatively, and second, in a positively. So we'll begin with negative definition. That means environmental justice can be defined as absence of environmental inequality and environmental racism. So since it is a negative definition, so it says that environmental justice is absence of environmental inequality and environmental racism. So there would be environmental justice if there is no environmental inequality and environmental racism. So now it becomes important to understand that what do we mean by environmental inequality? What do we mean by environmental racism? So environmental inequality can be defined as a situation where a specific social group is disproportionately affected by environmental hazards. Why? Because of unequal socio-economic structures. As I mentioned earlier also, it doesn't happen because nature does some kind of discrimination. It happens because we are living in a society which is based on socio-economic inequality. So if there are cases where a particular social group is disproportionately affected by any particular environmental cause, that would be a case of environmental inequality. Now, what is environmental racism? We can say when that particular group happens to be of a particular race, then it is a case of environmental racism. There are large number of definitions given by different scholars who were involved in the movement of environmental justice. Like Chavis defined environmental racism as, first thing, racial discrimination in environmental policy making, the enforcement of regulation and laws. If there is any racial discrimination in terms of making of environmental policy, its enforcement, it is a case of racial discrimination. Second, the deliberate targeting of communities of color for toxic waste facilities, the official sanctioning of the life-threatening presence of poisons and pollutants in our communities. If deliberately a decision has been taken by the government that the toxic waste facilities will be placed in those places where communities of colors are residing, as we have seen in case of North Carolina. So that is also a case of environmental racism. And third, the history of excluding people of color from leadership of the ecology movements. So during this movement on environmental justice, when these people started raising their voice against the decision of the government, it was found that the major environmental groups and organizations, they didn't take up this cause. And then Black people started saying that these environmental organizations or ecology movements are dominantly representing the interest of a particular race. And therefore, they say that exclusion of people of color from leadership of the ecology movement also a case of environmental racism. So first, if there is racial discrimination in environmental policy making, if there is deliberate targeting of community of colors for toxic waste facilities, and if there is exclusion of people of color from leadership position in the ecology movement, then all these, according to Chavis, include environmental racism. So this is a very broad definition given by Chavis. Now, another very important definition is given by Bullard, who says that environmental racism refers to any policy, any practice or directive that differentially affects or disadvantages individuals, groups, or communities based on race or color. What is very interesting, Bullard says, whether it is intended or unintended. That means if there's a policy which is differentially impacting a particular group or community, it is a case of environmental racism. If policymakers say that it was not done intentionally, that cannot prove that it was not a case of environmental racism. Bullard says it will be treated as a case of environmental racism, whether intended or unintended. Now, positive definition of environmental justice. Bryant says that environmental justice is served when people can realize their highest potential. Now, you see, it is closely related. The question is that when people can realize their highest potential, obviously, if there is environmental inequality, if there is environmental racism, then it is not possible for people or for the members of the particular community to realize their highest potential. Miller defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful engagement of every section of population in the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Two things. There should be fair treatment. At the same time, there should be meaningful engagement of every section of population in the matter of development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws. So it demands that there should be fair treatment and the laws, the regulations, the policy should be inclusive. Now, what do we mean by fair treatment? Fair treatment implies that any section of the population should not be compelled to bear an uneven share of the impact of environmental crisis. And they must not be forced to pay the cost of maldevelopment plan by affluent section. We can see number of development projects across world which is very beneficial for the affluent section of the population, but its impact on the people at the fringes is not equal. We can talk about number of dam projects where immediately it is the poor people who got displaced. So that's why it says that there should be fair treatment, and it means that any section of the population should not be compelled to bear an uneven share of the impact of environmental crisis and need not to pay the spatial cost for maldevelopment planned by the affluent section. So in a nutshell, environmental justice upholds the inherent right of all communities to political, economic, cultural, and environmental self-determination. It demands what? A comprehensive protection against nuclear testing, resource extraction, hazardous waste production, and the disposal of toxic substances. Along with that, it also emphasizes safeguarding the right of the affected individuals. How? By ensuring that they receive due compensation for the harm they have suffered and access to quality health care. Here, I would like to tell you about one very important movement in India. We will discuss about it in coming lectures. That is Narmada Bachao Andolan or Save Narmada movement. If you see that movement, it was against the dam project, and there were two reasons. One, that this dam is going to impact nature, and the second one was that the construction of dam led to displacement of many people, many local people, poor people, and this movement demanded what? That since the impact of this construction of dam is disproportionate on these people. So they need to be compensated. And the compensation should be full compensation. And this led to this whole movement of Save Narmada. So this is also a case of environmental justice movement. Now we will talk about the next concept, that is environmental literacy. Now when we talk about environmental literacy, firstly we need to understand that what do we mean by literacy, how it has been defined over a period of time. So if we talk about its traditional definition, so during the Industrial Revolution, it was defined as the basic capacity to read, write, and arithmetic. In fact, this definition was developed keeping in view the need of the job market. It was a kind of a prerequisite to prepare an efficient workforce capable of understanding basic instructions, engaging in basic written communication, and performing routine office functions. So, this has been the traditional definition of literacy, that one can be called literate if he or she knows basic reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. When we look at different dictionaries, they define literacy in two terms. The first is ability to read and write, and second, knowledge or capability in a particular field or fields. So these are the two aspects of literacy. UNESCO has given a very, very broad definition of literacy. It defines literacy as a continuum of learning in enabling individuals to achieve their goals, to develop their knowledge and potential, and to participate fully in their community and wider society. So first thing, that individual should be enabled to achieve their goals, to develop their knowledge and potential, and should be capable of full participation in their community and wider society. When these two aspects is covered, only then we can say this is the concept of literacy. Now, in the 21st century, literacy has a broader meaning, which includes what? Digital literacy, technical literacy, environmental literacy. In democracy, we are also talking about electoral literacy. Now, we need to understand what do we mean by environmental literacy. If we look at the history of the concept, we would find that the term was first conceptualized during the 1960s. And it is very natural because it was 1960s when for the first time it was realized that environmental crisis is taking an acute form. And it became very clear that now we need to have a kind of transformed mindset. And that's why this concept of environmental literacy emerged. One of the most comprehensive definition of environmental literacy has been given by Belgrade Charter, issued at the first International Conference on Environmental Education. This conference held in former Yugoslavia. We'll try to understand how the Charter defines environmental literacy. It says the goal of environmental education is to develop a world population that is aware of and concerned about the environment. First thing is that one should be aware and concerned about the environment and its associated problems, and which has the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and motivations to work individually and collectively towards solutions of current problems and the prevention of new ones. So there are three aspects. One should be aware of the environmental issues, one should be concerned about it, and along with that, one should have necessary knowledge, skills, attitudes, motivations, and commitment to bring the change. Another definition of environmental literacy has been given by the North American Association for Environmental Education. It says that environmental literacy refers to an individual's understanding, skills, and motivations to make responsible decisions that consider his/her relationship to natural systems, communities, and future generation. So this definition is saying what? That environmental literacy include individuals' understanding, skills, and motivations so that one can make responsible decision. While taking decision, one should take into consideration his or her relationship to natural system, communities, and future generations. That means environmental literacy basically aims at preparing individuals who are ecologically conscious. So, on the basis of the above definition, we can say environmental literacy comprises four primary components. First, knowledge and understanding. So, an individual must possess an introductory understanding of ecological principles, environmental processes, and the impact of human activities on ecosystem. Second, cognitive and critical thinking skills. So, environmental literacy involves what? The ability to analyze environmental issues, evaluate evidences, and problem solving. Third, this is very important. You see, one can have understanding of environmental issue, one can have understanding about the ecological process, one can have the ability to think critically over it, but actual change would not come unless and until there are certain attitudes and values. Why? It requires a sense of environmental responsibility and ethical considerations, leading to individuals' engagement in sustainable practices. Because basically individuals have to engage in sustainable practices, and it would not be possible unless and until they have required attitude and values, and then behavior and action. That is, application of knowledge and values to take informed and proactive steps towards environmental protection. So one should have understanding, one should have knowledge, one should have critical thinking skills. Along with that, one should have a sense of environmental responsibility, ethical consideration, and one should apply all these things in taking informed and proactive steps towards environmental protection. So these are the core component of the concept of environmental literacy. Now, these are some of the references that I have used in my lecture. You can use it as your further readings. Now coming to activity questions. I have designed activity question for this lecture differently. The first two questions basically aim at helping you assess your learning from the lecture. You have to discuss the core component of environmental literacy that we have just discussed, and you have to identify the cases of differential exposures to environmental disaster in the Indian context. And third one is you are supposed to do some research. You have to assess how far environmental literacy programs can be helpful in creating ecologically conscious individuals. And for that, you have to select 30 students who have done any kind of environmental literacy program and interview them on awareness, concern, capacity to think critically, and bring transformation on environmental issue. This research will help you to understand that what is the impact of environmental literacy on individuals' perspective. So, thank you, learners. Today we completed two very important concepts, environmental justice and environmental literacy. We try to cover its various aspects. So go through the lecture, and if you have any doubt, any query, feel free to post your queries in the discussion forum. Now we'll meet in the next week. Thank you.